Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Is the wife saying that if she's so attractive she should refuse sudden encounters? Today's story has a subplot. Enjoy the show! I'm Walt Carpenter, and my story begins in the office of Dr. Nancy Roy, a court-appointed consultant. Where to begin? Okay, Doc, I think I know. It happened when I heard a scream over the loud whirring of a circular saw while I was working in the basement, building shelves. As I started to walk up the stairs, I saw my daughter, Lynn, already running down the hallway towards the front door. I wasn't sure where the scream came from, but I figured Lynn knew better since she was in the downstairs family room talking on the phone at 4:45. It took me a while to catch up with my 18-year-old daughter, but the source of the scream became visible as I ran out the screen door. There, at our street mailbox, stood my 42-year-old loving wife, with whom I have been married for 21 years, waving a large envelope and some kind of laminated ticket above her head. I also noticed a film crew running towards my wife from a van parked across the street. On that Saturday, it seemed like all of our neighbors were home and were now standing on their lawns and porches, watching my wife scream and squeal. I was confused, to say the least. I finally joined my daughter in the front yard as Sherry continued to jump and sometimes even spin. I believe in competitive figure skating. These moves are called double and triple axels. She was still screaming, but now we noticed that she was laughing the whole time, which calmed us down a little but did little to explain what was happening. Seeing me for the first time since I walked onto the lawn, Sherry screamed my name, ran up to me, wrapped her arms around my neck, and kissed me hard on the lips. Truth be told, even though Sherry means the world to me, her little public display was the closest thing to intimate we've had in the last couple of months, if not longer. She just didn't feel like being intimate with me lately, and I didn't know why. Maybe we've just reached a dead end, but okay, I digress. My daughter just watched, confused, and asked, "Mom?" Having not noticed her daughter until that moment, Sherry screamed, "Oh, Lynn. I can't believe this happened. I mean, it really happened." The crew continued filming as Lynn asked, "What are you talking about, Mom?" "America is watching. I was chosen to be on the show." "Oh my God, I was chosen to be on AC." I looked at the crew and a couple of other people following them with papers and briefcases, and saw that they were all wearing Iton t-shirts, jackets, and caps. Iton is the network that broadcasts the show America is Watching. Suddenly, it dawned on me why my wife was so excited. Sherry was a big fan of the reality show, and apparently, she was chosen to participate. Of course, fans of the show usually call it AC, and the network's promotional stories always refer to it as America's favorite reality show. Whether this is true or not, I don't know, and I don't really care. One thing I knew was that Sherry was one of those big fans, certainly the biggest fan in our area and possibly the entire state. If she had actually been chosen to be on her favorite show, that would explain a lot, both the screaming and the crew. The mystery had been solved. The camera crew continued to film my wife's celebration while my daughter and I looked on in confusion and some apprehension. I knew the basic rules of the so-called game because I had watched it with Sherry many times. The game was quite simple, of course. Any game show becomes understandable after 15 years of watching it with your wife. During every episode, she explained every strategy and every little detail. The basic premise is that 16 strangers are placed in a house built on a film set. There seem to be 16 of them, but who really knows? They then vote each week for one of the guests to leave the house. Even though the show airs 3 times a week, whoever gets kicked out on eviction night is sent home unless they are one of the final 8 contestants, in which case they are sent to the pier house. It's another house in a secret location where the evicted contestants spend a mini vacation of sorts while waiting to be voted on as the winner from the 2 remaining contestants in the show's finale. Every week, there are competitions, the winner of which becomes the leader of the house. This person nominates 2 candidates for eviction. Now that I think about it, maybe the rules of the game aren't that simple, but that doesn't matter. My story will not be a retelling of that fateful season that changed my family's life forever. The game itself isn't that important at this point, it never was. But since I started describing the rules, I'll finish. These competitions can be both physical and mental. I knew she could handle any mental challenge well, but Sherry is as athletic as a sack of flour. Winning competitions is not always necessary. If someone makes a good alliance, they can go quite far, even if they play their cards right. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention that there are hidden cameras and microphones throughout the house. They don't miss anything. Cameras zoom in whether you're in the kitchen, bedrooms, or shower. Apart from the house leader for the week, who gets his own room, the remaining bedrooms are shared between 4 or 5 members. The microphones they use are impressive. Although many on the show whisper, the microphones pick up their voices as if they were speaking in a normal tone, revealing all the forgeries, deceptions, and betrayals for which the show is famous. These are the factors that will eventually destroy my world. Eventually, we all went into the house where the IT staff laid the contracts in front of my wife to sign. I immediately asked for a few minutes to discuss this. To their credit, they all walked out of the kitchen onto the deck, but it was obvious that they knew Sherry would eventually sign the contract despite what I said. My daughter and I were the only ones who thought otherwise. I started the conversation, but I wasn't sure my wife knew what I was even saying. My daughter was also unluckily quiet. Listen, honey, I know you're a big fan of the show and everything, but I have my doubts about your participation. Yes, Mom, this is my last summer before college, and I really wanted to spend it with you. Sherry just frowned and said, I expected my family to be a little more supportive. I mean, it's a dream come true. You know I never miss an episode, and here's my chance to be on the show. Don't you understand? Of course I understand, honey, we both do. But you have to see our point of view. We're both going to miss you. Hell, you could be on the show for almost 3 months. She laughed. You just don't want me hanging out with the cute young guys on the show. My daughter looked at me, waiting for my response to her mother. I answered as honestly as possible, I'm not happy about this, if you want to know the truth. Is my husband jealous? I nodded. You know that I'm jealous. I always have been. You do not trust me. It's not that I don't trust you, I just don't trust other men. In case you haven't noticed, there are men who don't respect other people's marriages. Oh dear, I'll miss you too, both of you. But everything will be okay, and Lynn, I promise I will make it up to you. I promise. Lynn wasn't about to give up and replied, This is my last summer at home, Mom. If you actually stay on the show as long as you say, I'll be off to college in Maine. When are you going to make it up to me, after I get married? When Lynn called Sherry Mom, I knew she was desperate. Sherry started talking about what she needed to bring as if Lynn and I hadn't said anything. I'm going to have to buy new underwear, shorts, tank tops, and a swimsuit. I have to be prepared to attract attention, you know what I mean? I stared at her. What do you mean, get attention? She giggled. I might have to dress cute to get attention. Being on the show is great, but I'm going to play it to the max. I've always said that if I ever get a chance to be on the show, I'll do almost anything to win. What the hell do you mean? I was starting to get angry because it seemed like she wasn't joking. She smiled, but there was something almost sinister in her smile as she replied, I guess it all depends on who wants me in their alliance and what it will take to be the last one standing. I was ready to explode and raised my voice. Oh my God, Sherry! I don't think you're kidding. Don't worry, honey. I promise not to have a full-blown romance on the show, but if I can get what I want with a little provocation, then why not? Lynn was outraged. Mom, are you really saying that you're ready to have an affair with someone other than Dad? No, Lynn. Like I said, maybe just flirt a little. It's just part of the game. That doesn't sound like a game to me. What if someone wants to kiss you? It would kill Dad, and I wouldn't like it either. Sherry backed down. I don't think it will come to that, Lynn. I love your father too much to do anything that would hurt him. Besides, it's just a TV show, and I'm sure they won't allow someone to take advantage of an old married woman like me. All this is for fun. I interrupted her. What do you mean, you don't think it will come to that? It still sounds like you're willing to do whatever it takes to win, just like you said before. No, honey. I said I'd do almost anything to win, and that's still true. What you don't understand is that this is the chance of my life. I noticed she still hadn't explained what she meant when she said she didn't think it would come to that, referring to kissing some guy. Oh honey, don't be ridiculous. Think about what we can do with the extra money. We don't need extra money. What do you want that you don't have? She smiled and replied, we'll figure something out when I win. $500,000 isn't that important. I shook my head and replied sharply, not as important as our marriage, family, and you. She was clearly avoiding my other question, wasn't she? She didn't answer. I wasn't sure she was even listening. It was as if someone had replaced my wife with a selfish, insensitive, and unsympathetic copycat. How was this even possible? So it was not surprising when my wife ignored my pleas. As soon as the network representatives returned through the sliding doors from the back deck, my wife immediately signed the contract, thereby sealing the deal. Our daughter and I could only shake our heads in disbelief at the clear disrespect Sherry showed our family. Sherry was over the moon, while we were much less enthusiastic. It was obvious that Sherry was caught up in the glitz and glamour of going to Hollywood and being on a TV show. The IT woman said, you know, we find it difficult to sign up mature housewives to appear on the show. More often than not, they are afraid of what their husbands will think when they see their wives on national television surrounded by young single men who sometimes want to find a mate. As you know, we call it romance on the show, and such things are very popular with our viewers. You must be a very open person, Mr. Carpenter. You couldn't be more wrong, I replied. She smiled, almost not noticing my answer, and continued, we at Ian have always wondered what would happen if a faithful wife cheated while on our show. It has never happened, but it would be interesting, wouldn't it? I didn't answer. If I had responded, I would have used words that would be considered inappropriate when addressing a woman. One thing was clear, she carefully made sure that my wife signed the contract before telling me that last detail. She then added, without any remorse, but I'm sure that won't happen in this case. You should be proud of your wife. Mrs. Carpenter is a very attractive woman, a wife and mother. With her long blonde hair and petite body, she looks much younger than her early 40s. She could easily pass for a woman in her late 20s. I'd be shocked if one of the young guys we signed for the show wasn't interested in her, and I don't just mean acting. Mrs. Carpenter is clearly a smart woman and appears to be one of the strong players this season. She seems ready to win and isn't going to let anything or anyone stand in her way of winning $500,000. I replied sarcastically, yeah, I noticed. I didn't even let my family stop me. Well, Mr. Carpenter, you have a wonderful wife and a real little dynamo, I must say. She's a wonderful addition to our show and a real beauty. I wouldn't be surprised if our ratings improved just because of her presence, and if she makes it to the finals, so much the better for us. But in the end, you probably don't have to worry about it. Probably? All I could think about was, did she just tell me that I probably had nothing to worry about? Is she kidding me? The woman from the network then told us that every night at 10 o'clock, we would get the cable channel for free. It's an extra 2 hours of the show, and since it's on cable, some more explicit scenes and language are allowed, she said. They don't show everything, but they allow quite a lot more than in the broadcast. What do you mean, more? I asked. Well, you know, some harsh language in some of the steamier scenes if there's romance on the show. I just stared at her in disbelief, wanting to throw her back into her van. She added, Sherry says you guys watch the show together, so you probably already know what romance is like on the show. Yes, I understand perfectly well what it is. Seeing my discomfort with the topic, she gathered up her papers and put them in her briefcase. All the while, my wife sat at the table going over her schedule, which included picking up a limousine early Monday morning and getting to the airport for a flight to Los Angeles. We weren't even going to take her to the airport. It was hard for Lynn and me, but Sherry didn't seem bothered. You could tell she was thrilled, not only to be on the show but also to be away from her family for a while. It was hard to tell exactly what she was thinking because she had never acted like this before. She was immersed in a fantasy world, and I was afraid that her head was no longer in the right place. In a short period of time, she had changed, and not for the better. The ink had not yet dried, but the network team had already begun to pack up and head to our front door. One of the women said to my wife, "Can I tell my executive producer that you are determined and are going to play it the right way?" Sherry quickly responded, "Absolutely. I can hardly wait." She then turned to me and added, "Don't get too jealous, Walt. It's just a game." The woman simply replied, "Keep it up, you have a plane ticket, so see you on Monday. Enjoy your last day and a half with your family, and get ready for the greatest experience of your life, other than being with your husband, of course." Sherry giggled. "God, I hope it's better than this." I heard what she said and wasn't sure if I was more hurt or angry at that moment. Now, looking back, I would say I was more angry. She then followed the network team to the van, discussing the final details of the show. The rest of the weekend was busy. When everyone left, I couldn't help but beg her to stay with her family. I explained that I had a bad feeling about the whole thing, but she simply brushed it off, saying that everything would be fine and that I had nothing to worry about. Later on Saturday, she said she needed to do some last-minute shopping for the show and also get her hair done. I felt bad for Lynn because Sherry left without even asking if our daughter wanted to go with her. On Sunday afternoon, tensions increased. I wanted to warn her again that one of the guys on the show might try to hit on her, but I thought it best not to. She already knew I was jealous, but I assumed she understood it was because I loved her so much. Instead, I reminded her that she was my wife and the mother of our daughter, and that she should remember that while she was away from us. Her response to this was both worried and confused. "So you think I'm not attractive enough to attract the attention of another man? Especially a young man? Do you think of me only as a wife and mother? Is that all?" I stood up and left the room to avoid saying or doing anything stupid. I loved Sherry more than anything, but the way she approached the show was disturbing. Lynn was speechless, and I think I was too. I had a bad feeling about the whole situation, especially because my loving wife was ignoring our feelings. My wife was always a little flirty, but as far as I knew, it was only with our friends, and even then, I was always around, so it never went overboard. Now she was going to be alone, and I had no way to protect her if necessary. What was even more disturbing was that she not only planned to tease and flirt on the show, she was looking forward to it. I think most people have a secret fantasy, but most would never think of acting on it. If this was her secret fantasy, she planned to fulfill it at the expense of her family. This, of course, was not typical for her, so there was hope that she would come to her senses before doing something she would later regret. The worst part was that there was no way to bring any sense into her, and she was walking into a situation that she had no control over, as much as she thought she could. As for me, I already felt that I had lost control, and she hadn't even left the house yet. I had a very bad feeling about this whole America is Watching thing, and my fears were soon realized. Monday morning, Sherry was in the shower with the door locked. I called her, saying that I had to leave for work, expecting a big kiss and hug from my wife, whom I might not see for almost 3 months. Instead, she yelled at me that she had to finish getting ready because the limo would be there in an hour. Of course, I heard all this through the sound of water, with no effort on her part to show me any regret about leaving me for almost 12 weeks. She shouted through the door, "See you after I win." "I love you." It was far from sincere. No hugs, no kiss, no joke. Damn. She usually kisses me when she goes to the mailbox, and now I don't get a kiss when she might be away for almost 3 months. I knew she was excited to be on the show, but realizing that I didn't even get a goodbye kiss really affected me. I wasn't sure whether to mention this to Lynn, but I decided she should be warned that her mother was acting increasingly out of character and that perhaps she should be prepared for the same treatment. Lynn was making breakfast, and I told her what had just happened upstairs. She was shocked and upset. She hugged me and said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I wish I knew what came over her. Let's talk about it over dinner tonight. Love you." I smiled as best I could and replied, "I love you too, pumpkin." When I walked out the door, I felt sick. Arriving at work, I immediately went to the toilet. When I returned home that evening, there was a message from Sherry on our answering machine. "Hey, Walt, it's just me. They said I could call you one last time from the limo, so here it is. Didn't want to bother you at work, and frankly, I was afraid you'd try to talk me out of participating again on the show. I have to stay focused, honey, it's for our future. It's so exciting. I've never been in a limousine, let alone called someone from one on the way to the airport to fly to Los Angeles. Lynn said you were a little upset that I didn't come out of the shower to say goodbye, but I was in a hurry, as you probably know. Well, I have a couple of people coming with me from the network, and they will give me more details on what to expect. See you soon, hopefully not too soon, if you know what I mean. Bye, and don't forget to watch tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. That was all. It almost sounded like one sentence, as if they were telling her that she could say whatever she wanted if she could do it in one breath. Although we were not allowed to have contact with each other until she left the show, one way or another, she decided to call home and leave me a short, insincere message. Knowing that by the time I heard it, she would already be in California, there was no apology for not kissing me goodbye. Instead, I had to listen to a ridiculous excuse. Well, I actually felt better about the whole America is watching thing, although I was glad she reminded me to watch the show tomorrow night because I had forgotten about it until that moment. Now, that should be sarcastic enough for you, Doc. So it's Tuesday, the first night of the show. Part of me couldn't wait to see my wife. I wanted her to succeed while she lived out her dream of being on her favorite TV show. I was just worried about how far she was willing to go to achieve that dream. All that was left to do was wait. Some of our friends had a party for America is Watching. I had no desire to go because I hate parties in general, but despite all my efforts, I still ended up at one. What made it hard to avoid this event was that they held it in our living room. At 8 o'clock, the show started, and everyone at the party screamed along with the studio audience in Los Angeles. I immediately felt sick and wasn't sure why. It was just a gut feeling, and I've always been a proponent of trusting intuition. The show started, and they began introducing the guests one by one. The first time they showed the contestants in the house was when they received their tickets. It wasn't clear at first, but they finally showed Sherry at our mailbox in front of our house. Everyone in our living room screamed. It was really strange to see my wife receiving our mail on national television, but here it was. They showed a short interview with her where she claimed to be happily married and the mother of a teenager. She briefly added that being a huge fan of the game, she wanted to win more than anything and was willing to do almost anything to achieve that. This was said with a sly smile, which the so-called happy wife and mother should not have had. Now it was time for the live broadcast. They stood backstage before going out in front of the studio audience to have their 15 minutes of fame, as Andy Warhol once suggested. I was only attracted to 3 people. The first one was my wife. She looked great, however, she always looks beautiful, so it's not surprising. God, how I love this woman. I always felt like the luckiest guy in the world when I was with her. She had the perfect girl next door image, and I, on the other hand, was just average on my best days. But she always said that I was all she needed, and before this strange obsession with the game, I believed her. Not even a little time after the first show did I begin to doubt. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. The next one introduced was a young guy from Oklahoma. His name was Harley, not that I remembered it right away. The guy looked like he played football in college. He was almost all muscle, and I could be wrong, but I think he wanted to win the game so he could have enough money for his neck. The last one introduced was some young guy from Atlanta. If I've ever seen a man I immediately wanted to punch in the face, it was him. His name was Jake, and for some reason, I remembered it right away. Something told me Jake was an arrogant man from the start. Again, it was a gut feeling, but then everything in his behavior confirmed it. Soon, everyone ran into the house to choose their beds in one of the 3 shared bedrooms, which consisted of 5 beds. No wonder I saw Jake go after Sherry, it didn't ease my fears. The guests sat in the living room talking and getting to know each other. Sometimes these participants lie to gain an advantage. I half expected Sherry to say that she was a former dancer and still single, waiting for Mr. Right. To my relief, she told the other participants that she was happily married and the mother of a daughter who would be going to college in the fall. Actually, she was wrong, Lynn would start college at the end of the summer. She also didn't mention that if she stayed on the show long enough, she might miss her only daughter leaving for her freshman year of college. Of course, she didn't mention that her loving husband was not happy about his wife moving out and living with strangers for what could be a quarter of a year. Towards the end of their first small meeting, they all entered the kitchen and continued talking, this time more informally. I wasn't sure if I saw what I thought I saw, but I thought I saw that arrogant idiot Jake cast his eyes at my Sherry. I'm not sure how many others noticed, but I knew a few did by the way they turned and looked at me. My heart broke when Lynn turned to me, and I saw in her eyes the same doubts and fears that I felt. I just sat there like a stone, wanting to call the network and tell them to bring my wife back. Or maybe it was just my imagination, but I think the general mood in our living room changed after that, and not for the better. The show went on, and they held a competition to determine the first house leader. This man got his own bedroom for a week. Before we go any further, I would like to remind you that these are adults participating in these stupid acts, including my wife. As the season premiere came to an end, they showed the contestants going to their rooms to unpack. The host then told viewers about a cable broadcast they could order from their local provider. The cable show was scheduled to begin immediately after Thursday's episode, so viewers had time to order. As the credits rolled, our friends and neighbors began talking to each other and preparing to leave. My eyes were still glued to the screen when I noticed how the arrogant man named Jake not only took the bed next to my wife, but also smiled at the camera as he moved it a little closer to her bed. To say I didn't sleep well that first night would be an understatement. It's Thursday, and it's time for the second show. Most of the episode consisted of recorded footage from Tuesday until today. This time, it was just family in our living room. Besides Lynn and me, Sherry's sister Vicky, her husband, and Sherry's parents were there. By the end of the show, I was glad there were no others but wished her family had stayed home too. Things were about to take a turn for the worse, and although I had bigger problems to worry about every now and then, I would remember that the whole neighborhood was watching. When there were commercial breaks or promos, they would mention the name of the show, which immediately reminded me that America was actually watching. It didn't take long before the participants began plotting and forming alliances or teams. It's hard to believe, but people were already planning betrayals. Jake and Harley were shown forming an alliance, and Jake immediately came up with the idea of involving a little blonde housewife, saying she'd probably do whatever they wanted and that they could put her in the final three. Harley asked Jake if he thought she could really help them. Jake chuckled and replied, in many ways. No one dared to look at me this time. I truly believe they sensed my rage, which was quickly becoming a close companion to my grief. There was no doubt they were targeting my wife, not only as a participant in their alliance but also as a possible romance on the show. There was also no doubt that there was little I could do about it. In week 2, Jake had already talked to Sherry about joining their alliance, and to say he complimented her would be a gross understatement. Speaking in a whisper to avoid the attention of others but being perfectly picked up by the microphones, he began by saying that they needed a smart player and someone they could trust, adding that they wanted to see her through to the end of the game. He then said that she had a great chance of winning because he really wanted to be there for her and not Harley when the vote for the winner came. She listened, and I could see that she believed his lies. Then he said that everyone would definitely vote for the pretty wife and mother, not for him when it came to it. She blushed and whispered, "Do you really think I'm beautiful?" I could see by his smile that he thought there was potential for an affair with my wife. This was eloquent, I had to admit, and I had no doubt that he had seduced married women before. He was going to take it slow and steady, he didn't need to rush. She wasn't going anywhere unless she was kicked out, and by this time, he and Harley were running the house, so that wasn't likely. He also didn't have to worry about an angry husband because I couldn't get to him. Looking back, I think he was already enjoying making fun of me. Luckily, it was only Lynn and I watching this time, well, at least in our house. Our family, neighbors, and the rest of America were watching somewhere else. It wasn't too humiliating, was it? Now my fears were stuck in my throat, but Lynn and I watched each show 3 times a week. Almost a month into the show, things started to pick up steam. Up until this point, Lynn and I had noticed the little things that happen when two people start dating, touches when talking, playfulness that usually leads to something more serious, and eyes that tell the other person that they know exactly what they're thinking. Plus, Jake had another trick up his sleeve. His seduction regimen took on a new approach that was both brilliant and sinister. This was the week he started subtly humiliating me every chance he got. It started on Tuesday. While everyone else was in the kitchen, Jake took Sherry aside. Although Sherry was the topic of conversation among the other participants, everyone saw what was happening, and most of the young people thought it was funny. The divorced woman on the show, still younger than my wife, seemed genuinely concerned, even though she didn't do anything about it. After seeing Sherry's behavior since she found out she was on the show, I believed that nothing a divorced woman could say would stop Sherry anyway. They were in the bedroom talking quietly, and at first, it was about playing, but that didn't last long as Jake started asking Sherry about me. She spoke well of me mostly, although every now and then she would say something that gave him an opportunity to sink his claws into me. An example of this was when she said that she sometimes feels like she is taken for granted. He immediately stood up and sat with her on her bed. I didn't really like it. He then said he probably didn't want to be like that with Sherry. He didn't seem like a bad guy, maybe a little arrogant, but that doesn't make him a bad person. She nodded. Damn it, she actually nodded in agreement. He added that he just didn't seem to appreciate what he had. She sobbed slightly and said, "No, he's a really good person." Just before she could finish, he interrupted, "Wow, if I had a wife like you, I would never leave the house. I would definitely never leave you out of my sight." She thanked him. Can you believe it? She basically thanked the arrogant idiot for seducing her. She apparently forgot all the objections I raised when this all started. I did everything I could to make her stay home. She didn't want to hear anything. Over the course of the show, they showed more of his subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, seduction of my wife, including a brief bedtime cuddle. By Sunday night, he was almost calling me a loser, and she wasn't defending me as hard as before, which really wasn't a big deal. The cable show was even worse after airing. There was hugging and light touching, clearly inappropriate for a married woman with someone other than her husband. I'm not sure if she was trying to seduce him, but it certainly looked like it. Anyone watching could see what was happening, and it tore me apart that my wife couldn't see it. It was obvious that Sherry had bought into his lie. She definitely wasn't protecting me, so I decided that the next day I would talk to the show's producer, Zach. I had to take Sherry off the show before more damage was done. While I could forgive her for a lot of what was going on, if it went any further, all bets were off. I couldn't sit idly by and hope things would change on their own. So, I left work at noon on Monday to contact the show's producers. Because of the 3-hour time difference between the coasts, I had to wait until noon, and it was killing me. Every minute felt like an hour. As time dragged on, I finally got through to Zach Bevins, executive producer of America's Watching. Our conversation on the phone did not go smoothly and did not bode well. When I told him about my concerns, I begged him to talk to my wife and explain to her that she was putting her marriage at risk by staying on the show. His answer was cold and calculating, but not particularly surprising. "Tell me, Mr. Carpenter, is this an emergency? Is someone sick or dying? If not, I'm afraid there's nothing we can do here at AC. What about my marriage? Isn't what's happening to my marriage an emergency? I'm sorry, Mr. Carpenter, I really am, but my hands are tied. Your wife signed the contract, and unless she is kicked out of the house by the other players or she ultimately wins, the decision to stay or go is solely hers. But that's what I'm talking about. Could you at least talk to her? Explain to her that her family and friends are concerned about her behavior? I'm sure if she knew, she would come to her senses." I wasn't sure if this was the case, but I had to try something. He continued, "Mr. Carpenter, from what I've seen, your wife is using her questionable behavior as a strategy to win this game. While it's none of my business whether I approve of this strategy or not, it doesn't break the law." He must have realized that I was unhappy with our conversation so far and continued, "You see, Mr. Carpenter, even if I talked to your wife, it would affect everyone in the house, not just your family. We also have fair play to consider." Fair play? You've got to be kidding me, right? You throw my wife into a situation with a predator and expect me to believe there's some kind of fair play involved? Listen, Mr. Carpenter, it's not what you think. For starters, Mrs. Carpenter applied to be on the show. We weren't looking for her. And while Jake isn't exactly the boy next door, I can assure you that we're vetting very carefully. Numerous background checks were carried out on all of our guests, and all of them showed that this young man was clean. I was seething with anger, but he was right. She certainly didn't try to stop his advances. Even worse, was he right about the chemistry between them? How was this even possible? Suddenly, it felt like I had been hit in the stomach. All this time, I was trying to understand why I reacted so strongly to all these little touches and hugs, things that could seem so small and innocent to others but continued to break my heart every time I saw them. Oh my God, that's what it's all about, right? I just didn't want to admit it, but it's true. There really was chemistry between them. My Sherry, the love of my life and the mother of my child, seemed to have found chemistry with another man. In a matter of weeks, I went from being a happy husband to being replaced by his wife. What a nightmare. I paused for a moment before speaking my realization out loud. This is all for ratings, right? His grin spread all over his face as he replied, "Getting ratings is my job, Mr. Carpenter." How did I know he was smirking on the phone? Easily, I could actually hear that man's grin from coast to coast. He continued, "Don't get me wrong, if either of us believed your wife was in immediate physical danger, we would have intervened immediately. I understand your concern. Your wife appears to be on the verge of cheating, and you feel helpless to stop it. This is completely understandable, but again, my job is ratings." "So your ratings are good?" "Never been better. My bosses are very pleased. But I confess that I wish it didn't come at the expense of your family." "I really think so. But please try to understand us. The whole country is watching your wife's every move to see if she will remain faithful to her husband or, well, I don't want to upset you anymore. It's too late for that, isn't it? I'll be honest with you. Can I call you Walt?" "No." "Okay then, Mr. Carpenter. But I promise you that we did not plan for this to happen to your wife and the other young man." "Young man, huh?" He ignored me and continued, "I won't lie, it's going better than we could have ever dreamed of here at AC. But we've already done hundreds of shows over 15+ seasons, and nothing like this has ever happened. I mean, the married guest seemed ready to cheat, knowing that she and her husband were happy and faithful in the beginning only adds to the intrigue." I was silent. I didn't know what to say. He added, "Like I said, you have a wonderful family, and I'm really sorry this is happening to you." "Yeah, it looks like it. It's true. Please don't misunderstand when I say we're happy with how things are going. It's not personal. Again, ratings are our job, and your wife could be the best thing that ever happened to AC." I was about to hang up and lick my wounds when he said, "Not sure if someone has contacted you yet or not, but we are going to send a film crew to your home to set up a live feed from your living room for the upcoming show. I know that you and your daughter will be there and would love to see all your family and friends supporting Sherry. We will show everyone cheering for Sherry. You will see her, and she will see you. Although there will be no audio contact between you, she will still be able to see that her family is okay and supporting her every step of the way." Was this guy even listening to our conversation? I then told him that letting his camera crew into our house would be a cold day in hell. "Should I remind you that we have a signed contract from Sherry allowing us access to the house?" he asked smugly. "Her name is on the mortgage, isn't it, Mr. Carpenter?" I muttered that yes, and he said, "Okay, expect them in the coming weeks." Is there anything else you need from me before the conversation ended right there? When I hung up, I had never felt so alone and helpless in my life. Here I was, married to what I thought was the most beautiful woman in the world, and she was 3,000 miles away, seduced by some smooth talker. The worst part was that I had to watch it every night. I sat in front of the TV and watched as she was slowly but surely seduced into the arms of another, and there was nothing I could do about it. Later that night, I watched as Jake continued to manipulate Sherry's emotions and seemed to touch her in a way that pushed all of her buttons. Then I saw her reactions and this damn chemistry they seemed to have. For the first time in my life, I wished that television had never been invented. Again, that gut feeling came back, telling me that there would be more, much more, and I would be forced to watch it from afar with no hope of closure unless Sherry wanted it to happen. I felt so helpless. I had always trusted Sherry with my life, but now I wasn't so sure. I remembered how we watched the previous seasons together, and she teased me, saying that she would pick up some handsome young guy if she got on the show. She knew it was driving me crazy because I was terribly jealous. She even suggested that one of the married women on the show should flirt or even have an affair to increase her chances of winning the game. I remember saying that this woman would be crazy to put her marriage on the line for some stupid game and that it wasn't worth it. She replied, "It might be worth it. Moreover, it might be a little exciting." When she saw that I was really getting angry and saying that if it were my wife, I would divorce her in an instant, she would giggle and say, "I love teasing you, you're so cute when you're jealous. You know you can't divorce me." The thing is, despite her laughter, I always felt a spark in her eyes that said she might just go for it if given the chance. I never pursued this conversation any further because I thought, what were the chances of her being chosen to be on the show? So my logic failed me. In an attempt to avoid conflict and not start an argument without reason, I watched my wife being seduced on national television. I guess we should have argued then, but who would have thought that she would ever be chosen to be on this damn show? Despite what many may think, I'm not a complete idiot, not to say I don't have my moments. I realized that Zach Bevins had ulterior motives. The ratings must have been through the roof, judging by the talk in our hometown. I never thought he would be too kind, and I was right. I was a little surprised that he didn't want to come forward at all and at least talk to Sherry on the side, but mostly I expected him to turn a deaf ear to my requests. Then why bother at all? Until that moment, I saw no other way out. The next day, when I left early again to meet with a lawyer regarding the contract Sherry signed, I didn't feel any better. For now, I'll just say that it all ended badly. Now, before you criticize me too harshly for everything I may or may not have done and wonder why I didn't do this or that, let me defend myself. Although I said that I am not a complete idiot, I am a simple person. On a good day, I'm an average guy. What I mean is, I'm of average height, maybe average looking, and I have a regular job. I'm not familiar with television lawyers or the complexities of contracts. Even though I consider myself a boring, somewhat dull guy, at the end of the day, I consider myself a loving and caring husband and father who is willing to do whatever it takes to protect his loved ones. What I am not is a former Army Ranger or Navy SEAL. Few of us are, and for good reason. I'm not a former CIA agent or a spy with a bunch of spy gadgets. I'm not trained in martial arts, I haven't had my first fight yet, and I've never had any desire to take a ninja class at the mall. I've played a lot of sports, so I'm not completely out of shape, but I'm also not a weightlifter or marathon runner. Now imagine that you are just an average family man without much training. Your life is perfect in every way. You have a loving and faithful wife, a beautiful daughter, good friends, and you mow your lawn once a week in the summer. Perfect, right? Stay with me here. You're just going with the flow, and suddenly life sneaks up on you when you least expect it and hits you where it hurts the most. Then, as you fall to the ground in extreme pain, life slaps you in the face for good measure. Do you know what I mean? Nothing I had done in the past, either physically or mentally, prepared me for the situation in which I found myself. Like I said, on a good day, I'm average. What I still am is a very irritated, jealous husband, completely lost and without any direction. I couldn't get to the man who seduced my wife because he was being protected, but don't doubt for a second that if I had the chance, I would have beaten him to a pulp. Then again, I might not have stopped and gotten rid of his body somewhere far from the beaten path. As for my jealousy, which, by the way, I don't consider excessive, but it is still there, I happily admit that it comes from my own insecurities. I never thought I would find someone as perfect for me as Sherry was, and the thought of losing her was too painful to consider. I may be average and boring, but I have a pretty big temperament that I try my best to control, if only to be around my daughter. I believe that my daughter, along with her sister and Sherry's parents, were on my side and most wanted my wife to come to her senses. But I had a feeling that friends, acquaintances, and the rest of America might have a different opinion. Despite Sherry's behavior on the show, it seemed like people couldn't get enough of the potential cheating wife in the family that could be torn apart by a woman too caught up in the moment to understand what was going on around her. I had spoken to the lawyer only a few hours ago, but now I sat with a can of ginger ale and a bag of chips, preparing for another episode of Pure Hell. The show wasn't on the network until the next night, but I settled in to watch the cable version at 10 o'clock. They called it live, and a lot of it was indeed live, but they showed a lot of pre-recorded material that they thought was too hot for the network. Not surprisingly, Sherry and her lover took up a lot of this time. I was in the living room while Lynn finished her homework in her room. I was pretty sure she was already done and just assumed that, given the direction the show was going, it would be difficult for her to be in the same room as me. She could also be trying to avoid seeing her old man cry, which was entirely possible. The show began, and it didn't take long before my dear wife was shown. It started with Jake and Sherry sitting by the pool with others. She looked fantastic in a skimpy white two-piece swimsuit that she must have bought for the show on the Saturday before she left. To say that I was conflicted is an understatement. She looked absolutely gorgeous, and part of me felt proud knowing that a beautiful 42-year-old blonde housewife, who could easily pass for a 20-year-old, was my wife and lover. Then I wondered if she was still proud that I was her husband. She also realized that although the swimsuit fit her well, it was too revealing for a faithful housewife to wear in the presence of strange men. My heart began to clench at the thought, and it practically exploded when I realized that her intention was to wear it for Jake, not for me, her husband. God, how I love this woman. How could she not realize that her actions were tearing my heart little by little? As I began to wonder what I might have to do if she went too far, I realized that difficult decisions may be coming, and I wasn't sure I could make them in my condition. They got up and went to the sofa not far from the base, and others soon joined them. Sherry had a towel wrapped around her, but she was still cold. My heart was breaking, and my brain was suggesting ways to hurt this idiot who was hugging her. There was no doubt that he was in full seduction mode. Even worse, she completely accepted his advances. Her excuse might be that it was just part of the game and that she was just playing. I've known Sherry for a long time, and I can tell you right now that she is not that good an actress. Anyone with half a brain could see that she loved the attention. The other guests clearly felt very uncomfortable with their actions. This was especially true for the other two married women. It was obvious from their disapproving looks that what was happening was no longer part of the game. This woman, whom they knew almost nothing about, was risking her marriage for something more than just money. The rest of the guests left for the night, leaving Jake and my wife on the couch outside. Jake started smoking and offered Sherry a cigarette. My jaw almost dropped when she accepted it and lit it. What the hell was going on? Sure, Sherry was a light smoker when we first met, but she quit smoking long before Lynn was born, mostly because she knew how much I hated it. I wasn't controlling, mind you, or lecturing her, but she knew I didn't approve of it because it was so unhealthy. And then my beloved wife takes a deep drag and exhales a puff of smoke high into the air. She looked comfortable doing this, which made me wonder if she had been smoking lately and hiding it from me. Then again, maybe she never quit and was an expert at hiding it from me. I didn't know what to think anymore. It also made me wonder why she felt so comfortable around this young guy and if she had been doing something else all along and hiding it just as well. I would never have thought of this before that morning when the television crews arrived on our lawn, but now a seed of doubt was planted. As I watched them embrace, I felt like I was going to be sick. My heart just sank when Jake looked around to make sure no one was around, and seeing that they were truly alone, raised his hand above his head. As if on cue, she melted into his arms as she had done to me so many times on our own couch while we watched TV. Like me, Jake lightly put his arm around her shoulder and pulled her closer. I honestly believed that at that moment, if Jake had asked them both to leave the show and cross the country robbing banks like a modern-day Bonnie and Clyde, she would have gone with him without hesitation. Heck, Harley could drive the getaway car, which would free them up to make out in the back seat between bank robberies. By this time, Harley was becoming as cunning as his friend. Even the host, Katie Ross, could see that these two were having a bromance. Despite what Sherry might have thought about Jake, the last thing he was going to be was a jealous person. All that mattered to him was that he got her. There was no real emotional connection on his part and certainly no love. Jake loved only himself, and I believed that his only condition in sharing my wife with Harley would be that Jake would get her first and then they would do it in turns. What the hell was going on with my life? The thought of my wife sharing was both ridiculous and disgusting, but a little over a month into the show, there was a possibility that another person might win it and do just that. I hated myself for even having such thoughts. When the late-night show ended, I wondered if the cable version was even worth watching. I wasn't sure if I could take any more of what I was seeing. The last thing I wanted to see was my beautiful wife being seduced by another man, but I couldn't tear myself away because I just had to know what was going on. Now, I've heard of husbands who love to watch their wives with other men. Let me just say one thing. I found nothing erotic in what was happening and winced at the thought of it going any further. Watching what was happening actually increased my blood pressure, the reason being that I had homicidal thoughts. It's not really erotica, is it? Lynn must have been upstairs watching because as soon as the show ended, she appeared in the living room with an incredibly sad look on her face. Dad, I'm scared. Why, Pumpkin? She walked over and sat on the other end of the sofa but did not lean on her elbows. She was upset and nervous, and it showed in her body language. This is Mom. She's acting strange. I hesitated for a moment before giving a well-thought-out answer. Yes, I know. I can be frighteningly deep at times. My daughter continued, since when does Mom smoke? She's been lecturing me almost every day since I was 3 about the dangers of smoking, and here she is smoking on national television. What do you think she'll say when she comes back and finds that I've started smoking? I'll make it easy for you, honey. I'll spank you senseless before Mom finds out. She looked at me and giggled slightly when she saw my grin. She knew too well that I would never lay a hand on her or her mother. Then she became serious and said in a sad, worried tone, "What happened to her, Dad?" I shook my head and replied, "I wish I knew. I think she's just into the show and wants to win at any cost." Lynn hesitated before saying, "I don't think you're completely right, Dad. I see the way she looks at this guy, and I don't think it has anything to do with the game. I hate to say it, but I think she might be falling for this creep." I smiled slightly, mostly out of pride that my little girl has grown up and can think for herself. Besides, she thought exactly like her old man. I also thought that Sherry was too easily seduced and that she was actually starting to develop feelings for this guy, even though the game was far from over. Then she said something else that resonated with me. She looked straight at me and said, "Dad, we have to do something before it's too late. It's already scary to think that Mom is ready to do anything to win the game, but I think there's more to it than that. I mean, it gets worse with every episode she allows it. Your mother is a grown woman, and we must trust her decisions. Besides, there's not much we can do." I saw tears in her eyes when she asked, "What if she makes the wrong decision?" I hesitated before replying, "Then she'll have to face the consequences, I guess." Lynn turned pale. "Would you divorce her?" I couldn't speak at first, but I nodded slightly. Then, with a crack in my voice, I answered, "I don't know, dear. It's possible, but let's not talk about it now." She started to get annoyed, and it showed a minute later when she said, "Well, what are we going to do about this?" "There's not much we can do, honey." She didn't let me explain before she exploded. "Damn it, Dad. Are you just going to sit there and take it? I hear some people calling you a wuss, and it's getting harder and harder for me to defend you." Then she sobbed and covered her face with her hands so that I wouldn't see her tears. I didn't need to see her face, her whole body was shaking. I just said, "Come here," lovingly but a little insistently. She came and sat next to me on the couch, and I put my right arm around her and held her tightly for almost a minute before asking, "Do you really think I'm a wuss?" She started to cry again but stopped to say, "Maybe." "No, I don't know, Dad. I'm so confused." I nodded and said, "Yes, so do I." I paused for a few more seconds before saying, "Listen, Lynn, I was debating whether to tell you this or not, but I guess you put me in a corner. Well, and also the fact that my pride hurts a little when I hear people call me a wuss, especially my own daughter." I saw the sadness in her eyes as she realized how deeply her words about me being a wuss had hurt me, but she still continued, "What is it, Dad? You can tell me." I looked at her and wiped a tear from her cheek with my left hand and said, "Do you remember how I came back late yesterday and today?" She nodded. "Well, yesterday I called the executive producer of the show, some guy named Bevins. He's a little rat, if you want to know the truth." Then I remembered I was talking to my daughter and apologized. She giggled and said it was normal and that she liked to see emotion in me. Well, you would have liked this call. In general, I explained to him the situation and my fears that your mother had gone too far for the sake of some kind of game. He explained to me that your mother signed a binding contract that all ties with the outside world were to be severed until she was eliminated, reached the finals as a contestant, or was eliminated and sent to that other house where losers are sent before returning on the final night to vote. House of Equals. Lynn rolled her eyes. It's called House of Equals. Mom will be sent there if she is taken out as one of the last 8. Yes, whatever it is. Basically, he said it wouldn't be fair to the other members if your mom got special privileges. He said any direct contact would have meant the contestants' immediate removal from the show. But, Dad, doesn't he understand that this is an emergency? He thinks not. He said that if he felt it was necessary, he could perhaps talk to your mom on the side and tell her about my concerns, but that would be his decision, and he was not ready to make it yet. Why not, Dad? That guy is seducing Mom and could cause a divorce. You said it yourself. I understand, but this is a good example of how the world works and why most often it's about money. Money? I don't understand. This producer is a slug, honey, no question, and for him, it's all about the ratings. He admitted that everyone in the audience was sitting on the edge of their seats wondering whether the faithful wife and mother would fall or come to her senses before she went too far. I think these are called gold ratings. So Mom was framed? It's not like that, honey. He admitted that he couldn't have asked for a better script than the one they had and always hoped that some season would turn out that way. I believe him when he says that people on the show are not told how to behave and that their actions are not according to a script. I paused before continuing, so we go back to your mom, who has to be an adult and hope she makes the right decisions. Maybe he was lying about the contract being binding. Dad, have you thought about this? I have. I talked to a friend at work yesterday. His brother is a corporate lawyer, and he said as a favor he'll look at a copy of the contract your mom signed and tell me if it's binding or not. That's where I went this afternoon. Is it mandatory? I'm afraid so. These online people know their stuff. We are really at the mercy of the producers when it comes to contacting your mom, and they will take their time. So we are at an impasse. She snorted and replied, let's hope Mom isn't pushed into a dead end next time. She then blushed when she realized what she had said, but I just hugged her tighter and told her I understood her disappointment. I also said that I agreed with her assessment of the situation. I could almost see the wheels swirling around in her head before she exclaimed, well, let's take everything into our own hands. Let's go and pick her up. We'll sneak in and kidnap her, or better yet, break through the front gate and force them to give her to us. You watch a lot of TV, right? She crossed her arms and frowned. Look, honey, I know your heart is in the right place, but we have to look at this logically. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to give them all a Rambo moment, but that's not realistic. At least the mention of Rambo made her smile. Look, Lynn, the studio lot and filming stages are guarded, and this house of equals, where they go if they are taken out, is not only guarded but also in a secret place. Even if I get inside, I'll probably be caught long before I find your mom. I'd just end up in jail. I wouldn't mind going to jail if I knew it would stop your mom from doing something rash or if I could protect her from these idiots, but that's not the case. No matter how hard I try, I can never get close enough to save her from herself. She sobbed, closing her eyes in agony. I knew this feeling. Besides, if I tried to stop her by doing something stupid and causing her to be eliminated from the show, she would hate me even more than she already does. She doesn't hate you, Dad. She still loves you. She has a very strange way of showing it, punkin'. Lynn realized that given her mother's behavior, any attempt to reassure me that she still loved me would be a difficult task. I continued, at this point, the only thing we can do is hope that your mother will come to her senses and make the right choice on her own. She looked at me and said with a sad smile, it's nothing personal, Dad, but I was hoping for a better solution. Mom looks like she's lost her mind or something. I answered her sad smile with my own and hugged her tighter. I know, honey, I know. She hesitated for a moment before muttering under her breath, when did she become so stupid? Normally, I would have scolded her for talking about her mother like that, but since I was asking myself the same obvious question, I just let it slide. After all, when you're right, you're right. I debated whether to tell her about the one troubling option the lawyer had suggested and decided that she had every right to know. Seeing that I was lost in thought, she asked, what is it, Dad? Well, do you remember asking me a little earlier if I was considering divorcing your mom? She sniffled and nodded. Now you should know that if this happens, it will be the last option. I mean, there might come a time when I can't. I stopped. She said quietly, I understand, realizing that it was difficult for me to finish the last sentence. I took a deep breath and continued, well, the lawyer said the only legal option we have is to file for divorce. See, since your mom signed the contract, there's nothing we can do and no one to sue. But if I file for divorce, everything will change. What things? By filing for divorce, in addition to the obvious results in our family, I will have the opportunity to sue Jake as well as the network for alienation of affection for their role in destroying our marriage. Oh, Dad, no! I'm not ready for a divorce yet, but your mother may reach the point of no return when this decision is made for me. I understand, Dad. It's just so sad. Sorry about all this, Pumpkin, and don't forget that she is still your mother. Don't let what she does to me affect your relationship with her. Nice try, Father, but don't you think that I also have the right to be angry? I smiled at my daughter and asked, Father? Since when did we become so formal? She smiled back and shrugged. I was proud of her, but I was also sad for her. Almost exhausted, I found enough strength to say, it was a long day. Let's try to get some rest. A few days later, I was sitting on our porch, enjoying a cold drink after work, when one of my neighbors walked by and waved hesitantly, as if he wasn't sure if he should but had no choice as our eyes met. This brief gesture got me thinking. It didn't last long, but for a few moments, it washed away the mental images of the man who had seduced my wife. My thoughts then turned to the various moods of our family, friends, and neighbors. At first, everyone was stunned. It's hard not to be like that if you know my wife. Then again, she'd flirted a little in the past, and that was it, as far as I knew. Although since this whole America is watching thing started, I wasn't so sure. Overall, as I said, everyone was stunned and also very sympathetic to me. I didn't really like that everyone felt sorry for me, but at least I knew they cared. It also confirmed my suspicions that there was a lot more going on than I wanted to believe, and that those close to me knew that I was more than just a jealous villain. They couldn't understand why Sherry did what she did, and that lifted my spirits a little, even if only briefly. Slowly, the mood began to change again. At first, it was mostly men, but soon many women also started talking among themselves, and I got the impression that they thought I was weak for allowing this to continue. I think they thought I should do something instead of just sitting around waiting for my wife to come back. I even overheard several conversations when they thought I wasn't listening, saying that they would never tolerate such actions and would have done something a long time ago. Of course, they never specified what that something could be. Maybe that's why Lynn started having the same feelings, although I never asked her. Lynn didn't want to think I was a pushover, that much was clear. She only hinted at it once, but I think my explanation convinced her that I really was between a rock and a hard place. Although I never asked her to do so, Lynn began telling others about my meeting with the lawyer and the helplessness I felt in being in the position of watching my wife being seduced from a distance, with no way to intervene except to hope that my wife would come to her senses. At first, many men probably thought they would have done something different, like bumping into the guy after breaking into the party. I'm sure that as they thought about it more, they realized that there was nothing they could do either. Getting past security at the studio would be hard enough, but then I would have to find the soundstage where they were filming and get there before I could run into my friend Jake. I, of course, would have been arrested long before Jake was beaten to within an inch of his life, being the angry husband that I am. I have no doubt that my friend would have needed serious medical attention if I had gotten to him. And before you think I'm just trying to be manly, I firmly believe it's in anyone's best interest to avoid a jealous or protective husband. Rule of thumb, never poke a sleeping bear. This usually doesn't end well for the poker. Eventually, most people realized that I did not approve of my wife's behavior, but that my options were extremely limited. Although during that awkward wave of my neighbor's hand, some believed that anything short of bursting through the studio gates with a machine gun in one hand and a knife clenched in my teeth was a sign that I approved of Sherry's actions. Another one of my neighbors was approaching, walking his dog. Instead of embarrassing anyone else by waving at me, I stood up and walked into the house with my beer. The next week on the show, it was business as usual. Jake was slowly seducing my wife, and while this was happening, he and Harley had the house to themselves. Obviously, they were capable of all sorts of treachery. As promised, Zach Bevins, the producers of the show, called us and told us that a 2-person crew was coming to the show for Thursday night. It wouldn't be a big production, but they needed to set up lighting for the one camera they planned to use. I told Lynn that the network would be broadcasting live from our living room, and unsurprisingly, she was upset. Her opinion was the same as mine. If we just sat there with smiles on our faces and acted like nothing was happening, her mom would think we were supporting her win-at-all-costs mentality. I had an idea to get Sherry to understand before it was too late, and Lynn liked it. This was probably our last and only chance. 2 people from the network arrived and set up their equipment about an hour before the start, as promised, and I could tell they were disappointed to see only Lynn and me. They asked who else would come and were even more disappointed to hear that everyone else was busy with their lives and would not be able to come. Both people were friendly enough and didn't seem to have the attitude that other Hollywood people I've talked to had. We were told that we would go live from our living room right after the first break. There wasn't long to wait as they approached the first break. Katie Ross, the host, invited the show's contestants into their living room, where she was about to announce that one lucky winner would get to see their family and friends. I looked at Lynn and asked, "Are you hungry?" She answered, "Yes, I could eat." "What are you thinking about?" "Pizza," she stood up and answered. "Sounds good. Let's go." I took out my keys and followed her to the front door when a voice behind me called, "I'm sorry, Mr. Carpenter, but you can't leave now. You are going to be live in the whole country." I giggled. "Actually, I'm going to get some pizza. Do you want anything?" "No, that's not the point." "Please, Mr. Carpenter, Blands will kill us if you're not here." "Sorry, guys, it's nothing personal, but I just can't do it. If Beavens tries to blame you, I'll tell him you had nothing to do with it." "Fine." He nodded and said, "Mr. Carpenter, we watched the show and just wanted to let you know we're sorry. We don't know what else to say except that we'll look after your house while you're away." I simply smiled and nodded, turning to catch up with Lynn. We had just walked into Pizza Hut when my cell phone rang, and I knew who it was without even looking. Lynn and I were parked when I responded in an exaggeratedly cheerful tone that didn't match my mood. "Oh, Mr. Beavens. Nice of you to call. How's the weather in California?" "Very funny, Carpenter. Where are you?" "My crew says you left for pizza just as we were about to go live." "What does this all mean?" "What does it mean? Pizza? Well, this is an Italian dish that originated long before my time. I know what pizza is, smart guy. I'm talking about the fact that you left before the live broadcast." "Oh, yes, about that. I think my daughter and I are shy today. We're embarrassed." "Damn it." "Listen, go home right now. I don't know whether you were told about this or not, but..." "Damn it. Listen, Carpenter. This is Mr. Carpenter for you." He paused for a moment, swallowing some pride before continuing. "Please, Mr. Carpenter, listen to reason. If you come home right now, we can still have your family together on air for the first time since the show we taped you on your lawn. We already chalked it up to technical issues the first time, but we really need you and your family to show up. The more, the merrier, remember?" "Oh yes, I remember. But I'm afraid we won't be able to today. Maybe we'll try it another time. But then I can't promise I won't be craving a taco or a cheeseburger." Beavens was getting irritated, which was good for me. Time to play big. "Mr. Carpenter, if you do not return home immediately, we will take legal action for breach of contract. Have you forgotten that your wife signed a contract to be on our show and have us broadcast live from your home with 24 hours notice? So what's the problem? Sherry is on your show, and your crew has contracted access. You may have forgotten or were not informed that I have never signed a contract with anyone associated with your network, nor has Lynn or anyone else in our family. We have a dog. Would you like me to ask him if he would ever agree to show up? He's at my mother-in-law's today, but it wouldn't hurt to ask. He may not like the short notice because he will need to go to the groomer first." There was silence on the other end before he answered. "Your wife was depressed when she expected to see her loving family but instead saw that they abandoned her. Is this what you want?" I honestly didn't care what he told her. "Tell me, did all the housemates come over to console her, or just one or maybe two?" Silence again from the West Coast. "Look at it this way, Mr. Beavens. At least my wife didn't have to sit and watch her replacement hug me like I had to watch her replacement hug her. Now you're clearly watching the show, so tell me the truth before we go any further. Was this idiot right next to her, and did she look like she was not only allowing it but comfortable?" Zach Beavens hesitated at first before asking, "I'm not sure what you're getting at, Mr. Carpenter." "Let me make this as simple as possible. Did they look like a couple?" They looked like a damn couple with chemistry. After a few moments of silence and an audible sigh, he simply said, "Good night, Mr. Carpenter." I was angry when I hung up, but I was still more confused and heartbroken as Lynn and I continued walking toward the restaurant. She said, "You really enjoyed tugging on his chain, didn't you?" I gave a sad smile and answered, "As much as I can enjoy anything these days, honey." So, on to more important things. What will we order for pizza? This moment of pleasure was too short, but at least it was something. As I said earlier, Lynn taped the show that night, and even though I already knew what to expect, it still broke my heart to see it with my own eyes. Since Lynn and I were already on our way to Pizza Hut when the show started, here's what we missed. The host greeted America after the final commercial break amid loud applause from the audience outside the house where Sherry sat. Katie Ross asked Sherry if she wanted to see her family and friends live from their living room. Sherry seemed delighted and had tears of joy streaming down her cheeks, but that would soon change. Oh, the tears will remain, but the joy will disappear. Part of me felt terrible. Despite everything, I still loved her, and my first reaction was to defend her. But seeing what I saw seemed to justify my actions of leaving the house. At least I felt vindicated. Sherry did seem genuinely excited to see us, but she looked very relaxed, too relaxed, sitting and leaning against another man with his arms wrapped around her. It was that chemistry again, and I actually felt a tightness in my chest. Did you understand? My loving wife, with real tears in her eyes, is looking forward to seeing her family for the first time in a long time, all while she sits holding another man. If I could get to my lover, I would kill him with my bare hands. This definitely wasn't part of the game, and the more I thought about it, the more I became convinced that nothing she was doing now had anything to do with the game. Katie Ross, the host, looked very uncomfortable with the proceedings, as did most of the players. Jake, however, had a smirk that could only mean one thing. Although he had never met me, he laid claim to my wife by rubbing my nose in it, knowing there was nothing I could do about it. It was fueled by Sherry's words that I was weak and didn't care. The only other person in the room who seemed to approve was Farmer Harley. He looked like a big kid standing first in line for a roller coaster, knowing that after Jake had completely seduced my wife, he would be next. Speaking of movies, it was a show of the times when the cameras turned on in our house. Sherry stared at the empty couch and equally empty room. Katie, the presenter, immediately tried to justify herself by saying, "I think we have technical problems. Let's take a break and be back soon." Sherry was very upset when she saw the live feed from our living room and, of course, started crying again. I wasn't sure why, because I doubted whether she still remembered who Lynn and I were. If she remembered, it might have been the first time since she left our house. Where did she find refuge from the pain? He immediately began to console her with words like, "You deserve better, and we'll talk about this later." I was seething now. If you think that my actions might push her into his arms, remember that she was already there when the cameras rolled. Nobody pushed her anywhere. And although the cameras were rolling, there was no way I could tell her I loved her and beg her to come home. Plus, if you remember, I begged her not to go before all this started, and look how that worked. If she was ready for me to see her for the first time in over 6 weeks in the arms of another man, she clearly loved me no more than she loved our couch. On the other hand, maybe that was why she was crying. She saw the sofa and realized how much she missed it. I also wasn't sure what was worse, her inability to realize that she was destroying the family or the fact that she realized the possible consequences and was prepared anyway to live her fantasy. Regardless, she had serious problems and chose to ignore the obvious. Our marriage was on the rocks, and my hand was on the switch. As Sunday's network broadcast began, I began to question my sanity for enduring the humiliations my loving wife inflicted on me daily. Sherry's actions made me physically sick, and worse, she was slowly eating away at my heart with every tick of the clock. It didn't matter whether I was looking or not at that moment because now that I had those images in my head, that's all I could think about while working, driving, eating, and sleeping. Friends and family stopped talking to us about the show, and I think they decided it was a sore subject. Our friends and family were right, but Gary and America were watching. We were still the #1 topic between Lynn and me. We searched for answers and leaned on each other for support. If it weren't for Lynn, I would be in much worse shape than I am now. That says a lot because I was a complete mess. What do you think of our story today? In my opinion, this part was a warm-up, but it's clear from this part that the wife is in no mood to be faithful for the entire duration of the marriage. What's your opinion? Write in the comments. Until new videos.